at 6:30 p.m. on October 22nd. Ms. Reese, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Clay.
Present.
Councilmember Carr. Councilmember McMahon.
Here.
Councilmember Hales.
Here.
Councilmember Kusick.
Here.
Councilmember Smothers.
Here.
Mayor Pro.
Here. Thank you very much. You have before you the agenda for the evening. Motion to approve. Motion by Mr. Smothers and seconded by Ms. Carr. Any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Before you, you have two proclamations that the council has approved and will sign. One is for Arts and Letters returning artist Jeffrey Henderson, and the other is for the Tradition of Literary Excellence Award for Gerald Brody with Washington University. We will provide those proclamations to those individuals after we have nominated and provided them to the parties. Before you, you have the minutes of the October the 8th regular session. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Motion by Ms. Carr. There's a second by Councilmember Clay. Any discussion on the minutes of October the 8th? Hearing none, those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. We have no appointments. We do have swearing in this evening. We have Ellen Mullen here to be sworn into Arts and Letters Commission. Ms. Reese.
solemnly swear that I possess all the qualifications and am not subject to any of the disqualifications named in the charter of the office I'm about to assume.
That I will support the Constitution and the laws of the United States and of the state of Missouri and the charter and ordinances of the University.
That I will support the Constitution and the laws of the United States and of the state of Missouri and the charter and ordinances of the University City.
And that I will faithfully and conscientiously discharge the duties of the office I am about to assume with impartiality and justice.
And that I will faithfully and conscientiously discharge the duties of the office I am about to assume with impartiality and justice.
We will now have the swearing in for Henry Slade to the Board of Adjustment.
I, Henry Slade, Jr.,
Do solemnly swear that I possess all the qualifications and am not subject to any of the disqualifications named in the charter of the office I am about to assume.
do solemnly swear that I possess all the qualifications and am not subject to any of the disqualifications named in the charter for the office I am about to assume.
That I will support the Constitution and the laws of the United States and of the state of Missouri and the charter and ordinances of the University City.
That I will support the Constitution and the laws of the United States and of the state of Missouri and the charter and ordinances of the University City.
And that I will faithfully and conscientiously discharge the duties of the office I am about to assume with impartiality and justice.
And that I will faithfully and conscientiously discharge the duties of the office I am about to assume with impartiality and justice.
On behalf of the council and the citizens of University City, I'd like to thank both Ms. Mullins and Mr. Slade for your willingness to serve. And to those of you in the audience who are looking for a few things to do with your extra time, we've still got some other vacancies on other commissions that we would be more than happy to nominate you to one of our commissions. So thank you very much for your willingness to serve. We will now move to the citizen participation portion of our agenda this evening. For those of you who may not have been here before, there are sign-up sheets over by the floor. When you get up to speak, please give your name and address. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes. This particular portion of the agenda is limited to a total of 15, and then there will be additional time at the conclusion of the meeting for those citizens who have not yet spoken. The first request to speak comes from Ms. Erin Ginsburg.
Honorable Mayor and City Council, my name is Erin Ginsburg, 430 West Point Court. I'm here to ask you to support Track Neuter Return for Universities, Cities, Feral Felines. Documentation. My neighbors and I rely on our community cats to keep vermin populations in check. Here's a picture of the rats in my backyard. The predators as well. Studies show TNR humanely stabilizes and reduces feral cat populations, effectively addresses neighborhood safety concerns, and successfully saves taxpayer dollars. Across the country, colony euthanasia is being replaced with Trap, Neuter, Return. St. Louis City, St. Charles City, and St. Charles County Animal Control all have successful TNR policies. Please support Trap, Neuter, Return for you cities' feral cats too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next request to speak is Ms. Yvette Liebsman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. My name is Yvette Joy Liebesmith, live at 7570 Cornell Avenue. I meant to bring this earlier. A few months ago, used to be on the record, Mr. Tom Bloomfield of the Third Ward started a wonderful post where how to spend the $10 million TIF funds. He is a Third Ward resident. I wanted to read some of these into the record for you to give you some. This is a very positive thing. A lot of positive activities were recommended. Some of them are already in the works. Some of them are new suggestions. First is to extend the Great Rivers Greenway from I-70, 170 rather, along the south side of all the way to Midland. This would create a safer path for Ward 3 residents to walk to the development, the I-170 Island development, connect North and South Greenway, and attract bikers and walkers to small businesses along the Olive Corridor. Number two is to purchase a shot spotter for about $200,000 for 2 years. New Year's Eve is completely ridiculous. Let's invest in making our community safer and fund equipment for our police to identify random gunshots. Number three, purchase or lease vacant lots to convert to community gardens, pay for costs associated with building and maintaining the land, and recoup some costs by selling and leasing the lots back to the residents for about $25 a year. Four, fund a 10-year tax abatement for owner-occupied housing in Ward 3. An abatement keeps owners in the houses even if assessed values rise. It wouldn't penalize homeowners who wish to make improvements to their houses, thus increasing the value and incurring higher taxes. Number five is to expand the housing rebate program that we currently have for first responders and veterans who live in we'll move into Ward 3 for rent, but we already have that for homeowners, but to expand it to renters as well, so that police officers and other first responders who don't want to buy, it would be a benefit to the community to have them live there. I have my own personal experience when I lived in Virginia in the rented complex. Not only did we have a police officer in the building, but what was really nice is that his police car parked in the parking lot the entire time he was home. So that would be another thing to allow them to take their cars home and put them in the neighborhoods. Number six, he houses Create Trade School for your school scholarships for Ward 3 students in partner with the trade schools and community colleges in St. Louis, so the money goes further. Number seven is to contract with a grant writer to help write these grants specifically geared towards Ward 3. such as bus livability grants, which would improve the stops, and for pedestrian and bike safety grants. This was a very popular post, and other people came up with other suggestions. Jason Dunker said he would like to see a youth activities park possibly built on the underutilized city-owned lot at 7315 Olive, similar to the one that St. Charles County has that kids enjoy. He also thinks we deserve U-City deserves an aquatic center similar to Maryland Heights. Let's see, the other ones, Jason also recommended that UCD and Bloom receive some of the additional funding for the great work that they do to bolster our recycling program in case things turn south, as we've seen happen in other cities. Meg Goldman suggests that we also hire a fundraiser for the Olive development to make sure we have the money for sustainability in our future. And Jessica Walters-Patterson, I think, wants us to use the money for sidewalks. Thank you very much for your time. I just wanted to get these were just some of the many wonderful suggestions from the people who are incredibly supportive of this development and how it can benefit our city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next request to speak is Mr. James Hopkins.
Honorable Mayor, City Manager, City Council. My name is James Hopkins. I live at 8026 Amherst Avenue. I'm here on behalf of my daughter. She is living in the area, I-17 in here. That's what I want to talk to you about. Ask one question. She want to know when is the City Council going to vote on, because she wants a declaration. We start for Thanksgiving, Christmas, but she don't want to do it. Yeah, we got to vote on it very soon. So do you have any idea when the vote will come?
Sir, this isn't a question and answer session. This is public comment, but I can assure you that the city staff will be back to you. If you can leave your name and telephone number, I'm certain that the city manager will have someone from staff get back to you with a time, a general time. But I can actually tell you there, that Thanksgiving, your daughter's still going to be in her house. Christmas, your daughter's still going to be in her house. So just.
I left the phone on the sheet.
Okay, thank you so very much. Our next request to speak is Don Lee.
Good evening. My name is Donna McGee, and my address is 7584 Melrose. First of all, I want to thank you all for this opportunity to come before you again. I am a proud U-City resident and a product of the U-City school system. First of all, I would like to thank some individuals who have been very attentive and instrumental in my concerns regarding the huge sycamore tree that's planted at the base of my driveway, right next to the street of my cul-de-sac. I had not previously been able to access my driveway at close to my house on July 31st, so I can count the number of times I've been able to access it, but I'm grateful. Because Mr. Sinan and Mr. John Gates were able to put additional asphalt there, so I'm very grateful for that. I'm also grateful for the citizens who signed a petition when I was walking the blocks and I got to know my new neighbors and kind of ease some of the concerns they had about the branches and the leaves on their property, so that's a big plus. So I'm thankful for the citizens as well who have been very supportive and encouraging of me. Today I would also like to thank my city manager as well as my two councilmen, my third ward councilman, for being very attentive to my concerns and the others who I've been able to give a copy of my presentation that I submitted to my appeal. I'm just thankful that they were able to at least see what I presented to the Forestry Commission. Even though I had my concerns about the end result of that, I'm grateful to be able to be heard. Again, I'm very thankful and grateful for that. And I see that there are markers on my property where they're going to do some repairs to my driveway where the roots have encroached my driveway, and there's still a concern. So I'm very thankful that the area of that's still part of the city property is going to be addressed so that I'm not going over those real pumps or root humps or whatever. So I'm just very grateful for that. So again, I'm just counting the days. In just 10 days, it will be November 1st. I know the sycamore trees are not pruned between April and October, but on November 1st, I'm looking forward to having it pruned because the weight of the branches are huge. So again, thank you so much. I'm very grateful. I know it's been a journey. I'm still moving forward, but I'm encouraged. Just wanted to be heard. Thank you so much. Have a great one.
Hello, Sonia Pointer, 8039 Canton Avenue. I'm here to speak about the TIF project. You all already know how I feel about it. I think that the way that this project was handled was absolutely ridiculous. I think that you all did not do significant engagement like you should have, because this project has the potential to negatively or to some people positively impact the city in a major way. And therefore the community should have been engaged in a significant way. You had 3 TIF commission meetings prior to the final vote, and at each of those meetings, there were hundreds of residents who attended, who stated their opposition to this project. And I know that the city is planning to go forward with the project regardless of that. You had some people who supported. We know you asked them to come. We know they supported, fine. But there are some people in this community who do not. And unlike some of the people who get up here and speak and do not live in the 3rd Ward, where this project will impact the whole city, but the most vulnerable populations are mostly in the 3rd Ward. Those are the low-income people, moderate income, African American, Latino, and Asians, whether residents or businesses. And we expect you all to listen to us, not find ways to talk to us in condescending tones, not to undermine our concerns, but to actually address them, because it's your jobs to do that. And unlike people who do not live in the 3rd Ward, I have some concerns that don't involve beautification or Gateway Greenway paths. We have real concerns over here. People are losing their homes to foreclosures. People are losing their homes to tax sales, $3,000, $5,000. There's a real concern over in this community. And I want to speak on the meeting that we had, I believe it was last week, with 3rd Ward residents who actually spoke about what they wanted. First of all, the outreach for these meetings is not significant. We need more outreach because this is a huge project. About 20 to 30 people attended this meeting from the 3rd Ward, and they stated, myself included, we want an equity board that's not appointed by the city council or the city manager or his staff. We want someone or a board that can act as an intermediary between the city, the redevelopment, the residents, to make sure that the proceeds from this project are equitable, that is fairly distributed, especially since people have voiced their concerns about distrusting the city council, not just me, but people who attended the last meeting as well. They talked about schools. They wanted to make sure that the schools will not be impacted. I know some people said that the schools will be made whole. People at this meeting at different tables talk about an advisory committee. For me, that's not enough. I want a committee that actually has veto power, so that anything that comes before that board involving this project can be fairly vetted, so that we can make sure that it is equitable. People talked about tax abatement, lower taxes for those people who are most vulnerable, and someone suggested for the whole community, which may make sense as well. Increased property values lead to increased tax payments. This is what I've been saying for several months now. At these meetings, at the TIF Commission meetings, and behind closed doors with council members. This is something that we are very serious about. And we know you want this project. And the city could use some development, but not development that gentrifies, AKA displace people of color, lower income people, from the communities that they built a home in. So I would like for the city to take our concerns into consideration, but not just consideration, act on them. You have some people who are absolutely in support of this project, fine, that's their prerogative. And you have some people who are absolutely against this project. Address their concerns like you would address the concerns of people who support this project, because I know every last one of you do. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes this portion of the citizen participation on the agenda. You now have before you the public hearing for the liquor license of 2 Thumbs Up. I will open this hearing at 6:50 p.m. And I believe I have a request to speak on this particular item. Am I correct, Ms. Morrow?
Yes, me. I didn't know if I was supposed to fill out this sheet or not. When I came
If you would like to speak on the liquor license for...
Well, yes, it's for my restaurant.
I beg your pardon?
I said it is for my restaurant. Do I come up?
If you would like to speak to the city council about that, yes. And if not, then we will just move forward with the public hearing.
Okay, public hearing. We can move forward. Right now.
I'm sorry.
Go up right now. I'm sorry. That's okay. That's okay.
If you would please give your name and address and then speak if you'd like to the issue at hand.
Well, I'm not here to speak on behalf. I should just here for the liquor license. It is my restaurant, 2 Thumbs Up, and I'm with Oceanwara.
Okay, so in fact, if there are questions to be asked of the applicant, then we will call you forward. Is that okay? Thank you. Thank you.
What happened?
Beg your pardon?
Do I have to see it?
Yes, you can sit close if you want to, so you're going to have to get over folks, or I think you're fine. Now, are there any requests to speak tonight? There are none that are signed up. Hearing none, I will declare that the public hearing has now been closed at 6:52. Now we will move forward with the consent agenda, which is consent agenda J. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Motion by Ms. Carr. Is there a second? Those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. There's no need to speak now. You're good to go. How's that? Just so you know, I did that. Well, I apologize. You're welcome to stay. I know that Paul had made a motion to that. It's always nice to make one person yes to the meeting. Okay, we now move past the consent agenda. If we can now move forward to the city manager's report. Mr. Rose.
A purse. Your purse.
It's not mine. It is certainly my pleasure to be able to announce the appointment of Bill Henson as the permanent fire chief effective October the 11th. Bill just did an outstanding job as the interim chief, and it was with no reservations that he was appointed to the permanent position. So I would ask Chief Henson if he would come forward for his oath of office. I would also like to comment regarding his wife, Debbie, and express my appreciation to her publicly for her willingness to allow Bill to serve in this way. What I promise all of the public safety families is that I'll make sure that he comes home safe to the best of my abilities. Thank you.
I, William Henson,
Do solemnly swear that I possess all the qualifications and am not subject to any of the disqualifications named in the charter for all the final elections.
Do solemnly swear that I possess all the qualifications and am not subject to any of the disqualifications named in the charter for the office I am about to assume.
That I will support the Constitution and the laws of the United States and of the state of Missouri and the charter and ordinances of the University City.
That I will support the Constitution and the laws of the United States and of the state of Missouri and the charter and ordinance of the University City.
And that I will faithfully and conscientiously discharge the duties of the office I am about to assume with impartiality and justice.
And that I will faithfully and conscientiously discharge the duties of the office I am about to assume with impartiality and justice.
I believe we have a badge, and someone needs to pin it. So I can bring up his wife and family to participate in the official pin. Congratulations.
Chief, thank you very much for your dedication to our community, to your family, for always being there for you and you for them. Thank you very much. Item number 2, Mr. Rhodes, the Army Corps of Engineers.
Honorable Mayor and council members, we've been working with the staff. Tonight we have a presentation planned for you by the Army Corps of Engineers to update you on the study that is being conducted of the road repairs. In 15 minutes, as I understand it, has been allocated to this presentation. So I would invite Sinan to introduce the presenter.
Good evening. We have with us today U.S. Army Corps of Engineers representation for our project. You will remember study sessions and various approvals for this project back in 2016. This is an update delivered by Sean Sullivan from the Army Corps office. Before I turn it over to Sean, I'd like to also include this item. You will see on your packages there is a letter of support or intent by University City to participate in this study. This is to refresh and reiterate our support for the study and to be prepared for its federal funding becoming available. You will also see as an attachment in your packets the intergovernmental agreement between MSD and City of University City for MSD to reimburse University City for the costs of the local costs of this study, and so that's an agreement that is standing currently still in effect until September 2019, and it can be extended past that, and it's a reimbursement type of scheme for those costs. With that, I'll turn it over to Sean.
Thank you, Sinan. Mr. Mayor, City Council, appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening with you to bring an update to a project that's located in your community, known as the River Repair, Missouri, and that's what it's identified in congressional authorization. Our last opportunity to come before you and speak was in 2016. My responsibility with the Corps of Engineers is to identify where is there a technical or a water resource challenge. And through that technical or a water resource challenge, identify the authorities that are in place and seek the federal funds or funding needed to be able to implement or get to a solution to solve that problem. Since 2016, we've been seeking federal funds, and also we have been seeking through partnership, three-way partnership between the city and the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District, an opportunity for the Corps to receive sponsored contributed funds, which does need congressional authorization as well. I also want to introduce with me this evening Michelle Deep, who is a co-worker, a colleague within the Corps of Engineers and part of our plan formulation section, and would ultimately serve as that technical advisor on this particular planning study. Towards the end of this briefing, very brief briefing, we'll have a request that's presented before the council on how we effectively see this effort moving forward. So just a brief background. At the direction of the Corps, or at the direction of Congress, the Corps first started looking at problems within the metropolitan St. Louis area in the 1970s. River de Pere, in the vicinity of 82nd Boulevard to Purdue Avenue, was a flood-prone area that we were led to further investigate. And that area is identified here in this red outlined area. So we had a problem area that was identified. We've got an area that's roughly got a 10 square mile watershed that's very densely developed and has significant land use changes that have occurred to it and a lot of impervious surfaces. We've got records of flooding that have occurred in that red oval area since the 1950s. And ultimately, as we know all too often, 5 times in the last 7 years, flash flooding that exists and puts lives at risk and jeopardizes infrastructure in that location. So we had a problem that was identified in the 1970s and the 1980s with what we call a reconnaissance report. We completed that effort. That effort enables us to determine, is there a federal interest to move forward, to further get to a solution. And so we wrapped up and completed that reconnaissance report in 1980. Feasibility report we completed in 1988. That feasibility report identified a solution, implementable solution to address flood risk within the community. Chief of Engineers report, that's at the highest level within the Corps of Engineers echelon, located in our headquarters in Washington, D.C., endorsed the report, the feasibility findings, and ultimately submitted that to Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, who then proceeded and submitted that report to Congress. Congress acted then in 1990 through the Water Resources Development Act, which is the enabling legislation that gives the Corps the authority to move out on a solution. What I can't tell you, and what I can't fill in the gap, because I was about a junior in high school at this point in time, but between 1990 up to 2004, by then I had graduated, up to 2004, what happened in that 14-year period? What I can tell you is we weren't funded. What I can't tell you, what I would have to speculate, is why weren't we funded. But nonetheless, you can only imagine in a 16-year period from 1988 from the feasibility report when the solution was identified to the time that we were funded in 2004, significant changes had occurred within the watershed and significant changes had occurred within the river channel with which we had identified a solution to put forward. So what do we do when there's changed conditions? Ultimately, we have to go back and reevaluate a solution. We have to evaluate what's happening on the landscape and how do we get to a solution that we can implement, because we still, again, have lives at risk and property at risk. So with that, we had initiated, through that funds request in 2004, we received funds from Congress and implemented or initiated what we call the General Reevaluation Report. We executed a design agreement in 2004 with the city, and through that, from 2004 to 2009, we were moving out on the study. Now, we only move out to the increment or to the capability as our non-federal sponsor. So if our non-federal sponsor can only afford X, then we only request X. And so if you're looking at it going, well, there was a 5-year period that it took you to do some level of analysis, roughly $700,000 worth between what federal funds were brought in and what the city ultimately provided for this effort. It was a slow-moving effort. Then ultimately in 2011, we see fiscal restraints or constraints that fall within the city, and ultimately we had to pull the plug on the study, and it's been in pause from 2011 until 2014. 2014, the city re-engaged the Corps, and we initiated meetings, and then made subsequent funding requests through our normal budgetary process to Congress. We were not seeing traction where we were ranking high on the national priorities list, so what did we do? We started to look at sponsor-contributed funds, and MSD had come along and had offered those sponsor-contributed funds. So what we have here is a project area map that delineates 82nd Boulevard to Purdue Avenue. The area outlined in green identifies the 5-year floodplain, meaning that that has a 20% probability of a flood occurring in that location within that delineated boundary on any given year. There's 97 structures that are located within that area that's outlined in green, primarily all residential. Of the 97 structures, all residential. Within the area that's outlined in red, that's your 100-year floodplain. That means that you have a probability of 1% chance of occurring on any given year. Within that red zone, you have 275 homes that are at risk in that location. So with that, and I believe it, I won't revisit, but this is also the location in 2008 and in the aftermath of Hurricane Ike that 2 lives were lost in this location. And as I said, just to reemphasize and to keep it fresh in our minds, that there's been five major floods within the last 7 years in this location where structural damages have occurred. What I would do is, in this photo, I'm just giving you a visual representation. This is an engineering analysis identifying identifying the exact level of inundation that would occur as a result of a 20% of 5-year flood occurring. But roughly this home that's located within the project area would have 2 feet of water within its first floor living space. And if we were looking at a 100-year flood event, this home would have roughly 8.5 feet of water, be up to the ceiling or potentially into the attic area of the home. So what do we do as far as a path forward? How do we move this forward? So ultimately this evening, what I'm here before you this evening is to request and receive that validation from the city that this study still remains a priority to you. Secondly, we are seeking to obtain a letter of intent from the city. Now, a letter of intent is identifying, number 1, that this study remains a priority and that you're both willing and you're financially capable to cost share should federal funds become available. That third bullet is key. I can't tell you what the administration is ultimately going to be investing in. All I can say is that indications that we need to be prepared. So we need to be prepared that in the event the federal funds would come to invest in the completion of this effort, that we have the city, and in the 4th bullet, that we have MSD all in alignment so that the federal funds and the non-federal funds that are needed to advance this effort are all in place. Paperwork is in place so that we're ready to move. MSD, as Sinan had identified in his opening remarks, there was an intergovernmental agreement that had been executed in 2016 that's still valid till next year. Also, that intergovernmental agreement can be extended should the time frame for by the time any federal funds would be received to the time that as we move forward on the evaluation or reevaluation through the development of the report, that intergovernmental agreement can be amended or extended to meet the terms of the timeline of the report to preparation. Next, after we get all the ducks in a row there, we have the funds in place, we have the documentation in place, then we would move to complete that report. The great thing about it since 2004 is that we've undergone a civil works transformation. Once the federal government makes a decision to invest in a study, they invest in it to completion. There's no start stops. So that GRR will under a timeline by congressional order not to exceed 3 years from the date that we receive funding. And then ultimately, when we complete our effort, that report will then be provided in a recommended plan to Congress. And this is your 7-year outlook. I won't go line by line on this. But ultimately, if you look from the date that we receive the money, I told you on the previous slide that it would take you 3 years to complete the report from the time that we receive. Then the next thing we need is we need Congress to review that report. They're going to have to reauthorize and potentially see a deviation in what kind of solution we would see going forward. So 2 years after we receive the complete the report, Congress would authorize, we seek federal funds for construction, and then we move to design. And there would be and this is 7 years down the road, so there's plenty of time for additional city council meetings for me to come back and update and inform you and see. But the city would have a stake or an investment in that process for the construction of the solution that would be implemented to reduce that flood risk within that project area. And so with that, I have my contact information listed here, and then also my colleague Michelle Neeb's contact information. And with that, I'll open it up for any questions.
Do any members of council have questions for our presenter, Ms. Carr?
I know that the initial study suggested buyouts as opposed to retention and rerouting of the river to Pear. Would you expect the new study to similarly recommend that, or do you expect something additional?
So I think what we have to do is make sure that we consider all opportunities or all measures. From the standpoint of the original plan had identified relocating or altering the channel, opening the cross-sectional area of the channel up. That is a solution that, based on conditions or changes in the watershed, could potentially induce flooding downstream. So where you reduce the problem here, you create a problem downstream. There's also a suite of what we would call non-structural measures. So whether it's the acquisition of properties, buying those at-risk homes out and relocating those residents to a different non-flood prone location, that's certainly a measure. But then there's also the potential to look at flood proofing of those homes. Where you're creating a protective barrier around the perimeter of the home. However, if you're getting water at 2 feet into your first floor living space on that 5-year flood event, I don't know that I would want to be locked into my home during that time surrounded by water. The other thing would be to elevate the home, to physically elevate the home itself, get that first floor living space above that 2 or 5 or 10-year flood elevation, which at least keeps the feet dry. But when you step outside the door, there's still water around you. So in the end, what dictates is what is the velocity of the water and what's the depth. So ultimately, we weigh those things into consideration to ultimately reduce risk for loss of life. But to answer your question directly, there's a suite of measures out there that can be evaluated, from regional detention to channel modification to non-structural measures, and the list of examples that I just provided to you.
And I know that right now you don't necessarily have the answers, but you did, at least several years ago, have some answers, so you have some basis for judgment. How much would you anticipate the entire project to cost?
So depending on that specific suite of measures that we would identify to reduce that risk, it's early to tell. Too early to tell at this point. Now, in 2013, we did an evaluation, what we would call a limited economic evaluation. Total project costs for acquisitions of properties through would be in the magnitude of $25 million, of which the city would be responsible for 35% of that, which I'm trying to do the math off the top of my head, but would roughly be an obligation of in the magnitude of $9 million, $9 million.
Mr. Claymore. Thank you. Mr. Kusick?
Thank you. I have a $64,000 question. Who is ultimately responsible for the road repair?
Ultimately responsible for the road repair? Well, many jurisdictions. It's the way that ultimately laws and regulations are established. Congress has entrusted the Corps of Engineers under the Clean Water Act to regulate Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, which means you place fill into it, then it requires a permit. If you discharge water into it, then that requires Section 402 authorization through the state. If it's, you're going to, because MSD has a level of jurisdiction as far as local floodplain administration, MSD can have a say as to what kind of materials are going into the floodplain, and in addition to potentially even the local floodplain ordinance here in the city.
Thank you for that. And so my next question is, when there are issues of bank erosion along people's homes, who's responsible for addressing that issue and trying to correct it so that it doesn't continue?
So ultimately, as it relates to stream bank erosion, ultimately, my experience has been is it's fallen onto the shoulders of the city. I've had a number of engagements, I shouldn't say a number, I've had 2 engagements with University City personnel to evaluate some stream bank erosion areas, to evaluate and see if we have an authority that could assist. Our conclusion was our authority wasn't applicable in that location for stream bank stabilization. MSD can provide assistance with stream bank stabilization if there's an impact to their stormwater or utility infrastructure that they operate and maintain. So in the end, ultimately it falls to the landowner unless the city wants to have some level of public infrastructure itself that it needs to maintain from an integrity standpoint.
Thank you.
Hearing no other questions, Mr. Sullivan, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Thank you. Mr. Rose.
Honorable Mayor and council members, this next item asks council to consider approval of a letter of intent with the Metropolitan Sewer District. We've been working with MSD staff for several months to create a framework for them to move forward with the project of the sewer tanks. And so if there are any questions regarding the proposed letter of intent, we'd be happy to respond to them.
Thank you very much. You were each provided with a copy of the letter of intent in the packet. I would welcome a motion to accept. Motion by Ms. Carr. Is there a second? Mr. McMahon. Is there any discussion or questions to be asked about the city manager or to Mr. Vulcan? Hearing none, those in favor, please say. Oh, I apologize, Ms. Carr.
So we understand that this is kind of at the front end after this long, let's say, 1.5 to 2 year pause. When would we be apprised of whether we could move in this direction or not?
Well, Mayor, we have representatives from MSD that are here and could probably share with you at least some insight into the status of the project. And Mr. Mulligan, would you like to, did you have any comments on this?
No, we have to speak from MSD.
Hi, my name is Brad Leroy, Assistant Director of Engineering at MSD. The question was in regards to status. I think the letter of intent talks about we're going to keep you up to date as we go through this. The first thing that we need to do is start some geotechnical borings, and that request will come very soon after the intergovernmental agreement is signed. We talked about this in previous meetings. I said we'll know more in a year. That will give us time to do the geotechnical borings, and we'll check back in. Please don't hesitate. CNON's got my number. give me a call, we can give you an update, but it's going to take a while to get the borings back and get the analysis done.
So would you assume then within a year we would have some kind of feedback?
We'll have some indication on the geotechnical borings in a year. I think the project is, in total, what the final design will have to evolve over time. I think if we've learned anything throughout this process, it's going to be a bit of a lengthy process involving the public.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Number 4.
Mayor, this item asks the council to consider the approval of easements for a sewer project conducted by Metropolitan Sewer District. The 82nd Street to I-170 sanitary relief project consists of approximately 6,000 linear feet of 18-inch to 30-inch sanitary sewer infrastructure. Project is located within the city of Olivet and the city of University City in the University City watershed of the LeMay service area. The purpose of the project is to provide adequate conveyance capacity of wastewater flows to help alleviate wet weather building backups and allow for the future elimination of 5 construction sanitary sewer overflows. Be happy to respond to any questions that you might have.
Ms. Carter.
With the granting of these easements, then that portion of the plan can begin, that portion of the construction can begin. But since we're bringing more sewage in, how are we going to accommodate it when we don't have the next step?
Sorry, Mayor, if it pleases the council, I would like to bring up MSD, and they can share with you some insight into what this project consists of. Maybe at a more detailed level. Glad you're back on the spot.
Aren't you glad you came tonight?
I offered that to our attorney, he wouldn't think.
Robert went to law school.
So the project we're talking about is to build a bigger sewer. Much of the sewer that we will be building will be in a tunnel underneath the ground, have more pits in some locations. But the intent of the project is to make a bigger sewer conveyance system to convey the sewage in a more efficient way. It will help reduce basement backups and remove sanitary sewer overflows in the streams of the area. Did I answer your question?
Yes and no. Yes and no. So I understand that part of it, but we're actually bringing more in to the city by having that sewer be built. So we're bringing some in from Olivet, maybe even further west.
It's already coming in from that direction. This is just making a new sewer and making it larger so it conveys it in a more efficient way.
Okay, thank you very much.
By the way, thank you very much. I've not requested a motion for approval. I have a motion to approve. Ms. Carr, seconded by Mr. Clay. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions, members of the council? Hearing none, those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. We'll now move to the unfinished business. We have bill number 9365. Ms. Reese, do we have a second reading?
An ordinance approving a purchase and sale agreement between the City of University City and BRE Fiber Optics Ventures LLC for property located at 601 Trinity.
Thank you very much. May we have the third reading?
An ordinance approving a purchase and sales agreement between the City of University City and BRE Fiber Optic Ventures LLC for property located at 601 Trinity.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion to approve? Motion approved by Ms. Carr. Is there a second? Mr. McMahon, thank you very much. Any discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Reese, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Carr.
Aye.
Councilmember McMahon.
Aye.
Councilmember Hales.
Aye.
Councilmember Kuzic.
Aye.
Councilmember Smotherson. Councilmember Clay.
Aye.
Mayor Crowe.
Aye. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to bill number 9366. May we have the second reading?
An ordinance changing the name of Templeton Avenue between Paramount Drive and Montreal Drive to Reverend Joe L. Middleton Lane.
We have a third reading.
An ordinance changing the name of Templeton Avenue between Paramount Drive and Montreal Drive to Reverend Joe L. Middleton Lane.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion? Motion by Mr. Smosen. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Clay. Is there any discussion? Mr. Clay.
Yes, very quickly, I just wanted to acknowledge Councilmember Hale in coming up with a very creative solution to address this issue, which certainly the petitioner and others associated with this church have been wrestling with for some time now. And I want to highlight the fact that some of this was born out of, albeit a minor, disagreement between Councilmember Hales and I. And I think when council works best is when we take that and we come up with an even better solution than either party could have come up with individually. And so again, I want to acknowledge Mr. Hales, certainly my colleague Councilman Smotherson, who's worked on this issue as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Bedford, would you like to speak?
This is a big thank you to all that had a part in making this come to fruition. I really appreciate your patience with me, especially Mr. Hale. I started out with his traffic commission meetings about over a year ago. And thank you for the suggestion about renaming it and making it easier. So, and Mr. Smotherton, thank you for your input early on as well. And again, I say thank you, thank you, thank you. And my number is on the form, and hopefully I'll be hearing what the next steps are, and if the church needs to do anything. I'm sorry, Mildred Pettiford, the City of Life Christian Church, 8333 Fullerton Avenue, University City. I apologize.
Thank you so much.
And thank you.
Hearing no, I think I already asked for discussion. I've had public comment. Would you please call the roll?
Councilmember McMahon.
Aye.
Councilmember Hales.
Aye.
Councilmember Kusick.
Aye.
Councilmember Smotherson. Councilmember Clay.
Aye.
Councilmember Carr.
Aye.
Mayor Pro.
Aye. Ms. Bedford, congratulations. You've been a diligent steward of the project. A diligent steward. Can we now move on to the second reading of Bill number 9367?
An ordinance amending Chapter 358 of the Traffic Code to revise traffic regulation as provided herein.
Third reading.
An ordinance amending Chapter 358 of the Traffic Code to revise traffic regulation as provided herein.
Motion to approve, made by Ms. Carr, seconded by Mr. Hales. Any discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Councilmember Hales.
Aye.
Councilmember Kusick.
Aye.
Councilmember Smotherson.
Aye.
Councilmember Clay.
Aye.
Councilmember Carr.
Aye.
Councilmember McMahon.
Aye.
Mayor Pro.
Aye. Thank you very much. We'll now move to new business. You have resolution number 2018-15, fiscal year 19 budget amendment number 1. Is there an introduction? Motion. Thank you. Ms. Carr, is there a second? Mr. Hales, discussion. I believe you had the resolution in your packet. And the city manager, as well as the director of finance, are here to answer any questions. Hearing no questions, those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. We now have before you the first reading of Bill number 9368. Could we please have the first reading, Ms. Reese?
An ordinance authorizing the execution of a contract with St. Louis County, Missouri for Next Generation 911 service.
Thank you very much. We now move into council reports and business. I don't know if anyone has a report for any of the commissions to which they have been departed. Oh, I apologize for that. Past introduction. Ms. Carr. Thank you. I apologize, Ms. Reese. Under the council reports and business, any reports from any of the commissions to which you liaise? Mr. Clay?
Yes, the senior commission met last Monday. Much discussion was about what was presented here during the study session, the ITN program, the progress of that and how we will be measuring or how they will be measuring performance going forward. The other thing that was brought up was support for senior citizens on election day. So there are organizations that are providing rides for senior citizens on that day. Many actually of our local churches are providing that service for members and non-members alike. Also, I would take this opportunity, if for those in the audience and those who are encouraging others to vote, the ballot is fairly lengthy. There are a number of items, there are a number of constitutional amendments, and to kind of walk in cold might be a somewhat frustrating voter experience. And so if you have the opportunity to look at the ballot in advance and can work with those who you anticipate may have some challenges during the voting process, I would encourage you to go over that ballot with them to the ability that you are able.
Thank you very much. I will now yield to Mr. Cusick and Mr. McMahon for the discussion on Washington University.
Thank you. As we all know, on March 24th, 2014, the Mayor and Council approved Resolution 2014-3 authorizing the establishment of a University City Advisory Board on Washington University. The advisory board consists of 14 members, all appointed by the Mayor and Council. A copy of that report has been included in our council packets for this evening. I would like to read into the record directly from the resolution, page 2 of the report. The charge to the committee was to examine Washington University's tax-exempt property in University City and make recommendations to the City Council on how best to deal with the revenue shortfall from tax-exempt property. The council resolution asked the committee to address a series of questions which were broken down in 5 categories and assigned to subcommittees. I would like to read those very quickly. How much tax revenue is lost to University City's taxing entities because of the tax-exempt status of Washington University properties? What tax does Washington U provide to university taxing entities? What does Washington University provide to University City taxing entities that can be measured in dollars? What in-kind services does Washington University provide to University City taxing entities? And are there intangibles that Washington University provides to University City taxing entities? Number 4 was, how does the University City taxing entities' relationship with Washington University compare with the relationship between other cities with comparable universities who have large tax-exempt property holdings? And finally, is there a way to quantify the amount of increased demand on city services that results from Washington University's ownership and development of tax-exempt property? Also from the report, much of the work of the UCW Advisory Committee was done by these subcommittees. Subcommittee members invested hundreds of hours gathering data and consulting with experts and the relevant policy literature. That report was finalized and submitted to the University City Council on July 30th, 2015. The report contained 8 recommendations which were, to my knowledge, never discussed nor followed upon. I would like to read some of those recommendations. Number 1, negotiate a pilot. Number 2, collaborate with Washington University to spur private development and boost the tax base. Number 3, negotiate transfers of real property, cost sharing for municipal infrastructure projects, service assessments, zoning law restrictions, address parking issues created by students, transparencies in the IBA Heidelberg model. Currently, University City residents are faced with the responsibility of paying increased property tax with every property that is removed from our tax rolls by Washington University. This shortfall in revenues for University City creates deficits and cripples our abilities to provide necessary, adequate, reliable, consistent, and immediate services to our community and our residents. It also needs to be stated that while we did pass our current fiscal year budget balanced, it is because we have had to cut services. We have to delay repairing our roads and sidewalks and other infrastructure projects. We are scrimping and scraping to come up with a viable option for our police department, as every penny counts and we must maximize what little we have. We are attempting to help our bottom line. The council recently successfully created a TIF district to help with economic growth. University City residents are underwriting the higher education of the Washington University students. I cannot stress enough that this is what this is about. Students come from around the world and the United States. Many of these students will come to Washington University and receive their four-year degree and leave. How does this benefit our local communities? What we have lost. According to the report, page 4, Washington University's tax-exempt property in U City, if taxed, would generate $1.61 to $1.86 million in local property tax revenue, rising in 2018 to $1.87 to $2.16 million. So therefore, in the period from 2005 to 2015, we had an estimated loss of revenues of $16.1 million to $18.6 million. And estimates for the lost tax revenue for the period 2015 to 2025 would be $18.7 million to $21.6 million. These are only estimates. The amounts could be marginally different, especially considering that WashU property ownership may have been increased further between 2015 and 2018 and 2019. However, the UC WashU report further states with increased property acquisition and further scheduled development of other WashU projects in University City, the annualized loss in tax revenues could increase. The 20-year period is a staggering, albeit estimate, of $34.8 million to $40.2 million. This is what University City residents have lost over a 20-year period to underwrite the higher education of many thousands of students. Furthermore, from the report, the cost to provide services to those same Washington University's owned properties, in essence, the students living in those areas, is staggering. According to the UCity WashU report on page 52, the 2015 UCity budget was $33.7 million. If you use the per capita approach for expenses per WashU students, with an estimated 1,400 students, and it's important to read the report to find out why the report used the number of 1,400 university students for their logic for that. Then the per capita expense by U City for WashU students is $1.34 million, based upon a per capita of $954 per student. And when you look at the school district expenditures, the per capita amount is $1,256 per student. Added together, again utilizing the per capita formula, the expense allocation for WashU students that we're not collecting is $3.9 million. However, if you utilize the proposed valuation method, based upon non-taxable properties owned by WashU in U City, then the expenses would be U City government losses of $1.28 million to $1.51 million. The school district expenses, $1.68 million to $1.98 million. The total, based upon the valuation method expenses, would be $2.96 to $3.49 million per year. Thus, either by the per person or per property valuation method, WashU's tax-exempt property and residents could be allocated approximately $1.4 million annually to the city budget spending. An additional $1.8 million annually could be allocated for school district spending. Allocated city and school district costs would then be total of $3.2 million. There are 4 areas I think that we should concentrate in and look at when we look at the report's recommendations. And I think those 4 areas that we could start to look at would be a pilot program, which is a payment in lieu of taxes, parking issues parking problems being created by students in our neighborhood, zoning law restrictions, our own Webster Groves, as we're on boundaries around the university, Webster University, creating an educational campus district, and they've created zoning ordinances. And transparency. We need a frank and open dialogue with Washington University concerning their future plans. Finally, I would like to add that University City and Washington University report 2015 is comprehensive in its scope. I do not feel that another report nor task force to explore the same issues would be of any benefit. We have those findings in front of us and should now start to address the recommendations of the report in earnest. Let me also say that we have a unique relationship with Washington University, unlike that of our neighbors. No other municipality in St. Louis County is impacted in the same way as University City. We certainly value and appreciate having Washington University as our neighbors. However, they need to do more. They need to understand the impact on our fiscal budget created by the removal of so much taxable property. And we need to start seriously considering zoning ordinances. How long will we allow Washington University to continue purchasing property in University City and specifically in the Delmar Loop? The Delmar Loop, with all of its amazing shops, businesses, and restaurants, is the economic economic backbone of University City. Currently, it is a part of University City. We need to take steps to make sure that the Del Mar Loop stays that way and not just another campus designation for Washington University. And at this point, I would like to ask my colleagues for how they would like to proceed with some of these issues. Thank you.
Ms. Carr?
Well, I think one of the things that maybe you didn't mention, but that certainly should be addressed, is compliance with our code. I have seen over my last almost 7 years that we change our code almost after the fact, that WashU has asked for something, it seems to be granted, and then we find out that it really wasn't authorized by code, and so we've been changing our code. And so I think we need to stop that. I think we need to enforce the code, and I think there'll probably be others who will say this, but we have many residences here, that in which more than 3 unrelated people live, both in Ward 1 and in Ward 2, in the Parkview Gardens area. And if we would simply enforce that or redesignate those residences, and most of those are homes, as dormitories, there might be something else that we can do. So we can take some steps. I feel more comfortable at this point making sure that we've done everything that we can do. Because some of these other things we're asking, in a sense, we're inviting, but we're asking permission from Washington University. Will you please come to the table? But there are things that we can do. And I believe that your zoning and your zoning restrictions fall within that realm of things that we can do as well. I think that shows a seriousness of purpose. I need to thank both you and Councilmember McMahon for bringing this forward. When the report was first issued, we had a study session and then a presentation, and then somehow this report disappeared on our website. It took great search ability to locate the report until maybe last year when Ms. Reese was hired, and I requested that she make sure that that report was readily available. So if you read the report, and I think you will be very surprised because it is so comprehensive. And it does deal with the acquisition of this land starting in about 2005 and 2007 in particular. One of the things that I think is important for people to recognize is that there were 7 people on council who appointed 2 people each to this commission. And it was a council that was not necessarily in agreement. So there was a broad range of appointees, of advisory members who brought a lot of different positions and opinions to the table. And if you look at the report under the table of contents, under the acknowledgments, I think it's worth reading just to remind everybody that WashU did participate. They were asked, in a sense, not to sit down and make the final determinations, but to present to that task force what they saw as their contribution. So if you don't mind, I'd like to read those acknowledgments. First, we would like to thank Keith Cole, Assistant Director of Finances at University City, for his help and patience in arranging meetings, taking notes, tracking down information. This included many nighttime meetings outside of normal office hours. Officials at Washington University were helpful and professional in providing us with information when requested. In particular, Cheryl Davis-Dean took time out of her duties to present to the Committee on Washington University's investments and contributions to University City. Council members Paulette Carr and Steve Kraft served as liaisons between the UCWU Committee and City Council. They regularly attended our meetings and made The recommendations in this report, however, represent the views of the committee alone and are not the official position of the City Council or its members. Nevertheless, we hope the City Council will seriously consider our recommendations. We did accept the report. We did not, at the time, seriously consider the recommendations. In fact, I venture to say that few people on the council read that report. So again, I truly appreciate it. This report was not, I did not contribute to this report. In fact, I never submitted emails at all. I simply read the materials that were being presented, and my counterpart and I seldom agreed on anything. And so you can see that it really did represent a very broad view. Again, I truly appreciate you bringing this to us now to consider. And I hope that we will look at all of the recommendations and see how it is we can address those recommendations.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. Mr. Hales.
Thank you. To Mr. Cusick, I think we agree on much of what you said. I too agree that, well, I thank both of you for bringing this forward as well. The report really is incredibly detailed and very well done. All the citizens who were involved in it clearly spent a lot of time and deliberation on it. The problem is it's now more than 3 years old. And so I'm not really prepared to say that I don't think we need another study because things have evolved since then. I think this requires really an ongoing look. And I think this is the first step, and I hope the next step, and my suggestion would be, this is exactly the kind of thing 3 years ago that the council should have had, not just a study session, but multiple study sessions on. I know we're all probably a little tired of having all these study sessions, but there's obviously been a lot we've had to cover. So when you go through this report, it's 62 pages, I think, incredibly detailed. It does warrant the thorough, I think, deliberation of the council. It should have had that 3 years ago. Where this was and where we are now are two very different things, very likely. I agree with all of the recommendations. I was so impressed with, and agree with pretty much all of them entirely as being avenues that we need to be looking at and having those conversations. So I don't think we can have those conversations without WashU at the table. I think that's a very constructive thing to do, but I think we need to do our part to go through this and figure out what the next steps are moving forward.
Mr. McMahon.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks to Mr. Cusick for moving this issue forward and bringing it to our attention. I agree much with what Mr. Hale said. I think we can start with the report and looking at the recommendations. Maybe the way I see it in a broad brushstroke is that when we talk about these issues with WashU, and this is the WashU report, we seem to start to commingle ideas because there's so many of them that WashU touches when we touch WashU, and it's just, there's so much there. So I think one of the steps moving forward is to prioritize the different recommendations. Are all of them things that we do need to revisit, or are there some that we have enough information that we can move forward? Looking at parking issues, do we know what those are, or can we go into those and find comprehensive solutions instead of waiting for neighborhoods to come up with and say, now the students are parking in our neighborhood, they get permit parking, and then they chase the students to another neighborhood and we start over. Can we already address that without another report? Can we just get in and so if we prioritize those, pick the ones we can, as I think I've heard Ms. Carr say before, find the low-hanging fruit, get to work on those, and move our way through these. I think we can make them manageable by taking them issue by issue instead of just saying we're going to look at WashU. I think that's the next step, is really kind of knocking these off.
Mr. Clay.
Thank you, Councilman Cusick, for bringing this forward. I certainly agree with Councilmember McMahon in that I think there are some things we can be acting on now. And I think addressing those things first, we determine whether or not further study is needed. But if that is the case, I would suggest humbly that perhaps Washington University pay for any further study that might be needed if we do so in partnership with them. I know with this issue, often the kind of everyday challenges with Washington University manifest more dramatically in the first and second ward, parking, some of the ongoing construction, some of the other issues, but Councilman Smotherson and I have certainly discussed this. I think there's, while those day-to-day challenges may not be resonant as much in the third ward, I think there's tremendous opportunities in the third ward, and that as we see more folks from Washington moving into the third ward, there is a real vested interest for Washington University to support University City and being the third ward councilman, I'll say the third ward, because as we know, as the third ward goes, all of University City tends to go. And so I think there's a real opportunity with a new chancellor coming on board to articulate some of the things that are outlined in the report that we prioritize, but also looking perhaps at some unique ways to support things in the third ward. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to make a few brief comments before we move forward. Again, having read the report, the citizens did just a superb job of walking through what was, to me, a very complex situation, and their dedication is was very impressive. I think for me, a lot of this just is about fair share, and that is just asking our neighbor to pay their fair share, whether it's police, whether it's fire, whether it's parking, and some of it is just thinking about it. And to our neighbor to the south, I would ask, when you charge as much as you do for parking in your buildings, do you not think that then the students are going to want to park on our streets for free? And when they park on our streets for free, those of us who pay taxes have no place to park. Now that is a logical progression from a very simple act of this university. When you charge for parking passes that are that much, and that person then chooses to park for free on the street, and the people who pay the taxes have no parking because your parking rates were that high. Part of this is just being a good neighbor and thinking this through. I also truly believe that when the police and the fire come to my house, they come to my house and I pay for that service every year on my taxes. I do not believe our neighbor does that, and I think that is large. When we all, over the past few years, came to this council, we've always said that we appreciate the relationship that we have with WashU, and I do think probably as much as anybody, particularly living-wise, I live as close to as anybody. But I also have said, and I think it's true, that this relationship is going to be crunchy for a while. I think it is time for us to ask the questions that are being asked at this time. When Mr. Clay talked about the third ward and housing, when we're talking about leveraging these TIF dollars, one of the best ways to leverage these TIF dollars is for WashU to help us leverage these TIF dollars by increasing home ownership in the third ward. And as a pathway forward, the thing that I would suggest, I realize we talked a little bit tongue-in-cheek about our study sessions, but by the way, all of our study sessions don't have to be on Monday night at 5:30. They really don't. I would think that this subject matter is probably something for a study session on another evening or another afternoon, depending on everybody's schedule. And it does take more than an hour to work through this. And we owe it to ourselves and the people who elected us to take this matter seriously and move forward. I think there's a little bit of is the study up to date, is the study not up to date? I think that's probably something that we would look at our city manager and staff, particularly Keith, who helped work on this study originally. And I think there is definitely an opportunity to make outreach to Washington University, but I would suggest that we as a body put this on the agenda for a study session, at least one before year end, and not on a Monday night, so we're not pressed. And it's an open dialogue amongst us. The citizens can all come. WashU can come, listen, by all means, but I think we need to continue moving forward because I do believe that the pocketing of this report several years ago needs to be addressed and needs to be moved forward. So, Mr. Kusick, thank you for bringing it forward. And unless there's any objection, I would ask the city manager to schedule a study session in the next 30 to 40 days on WSU, depending on the WSU study. And I like that, we'll aim through, we'll all work through that, but I think we probably need to at least get that going. And I prefer, this myself, not doing it Monday night so we don't have time constraint of a 6:30 opening. Thank you very much. I believe that concludes, unless there's someone else who would like to speak from the council on the WSU matter. We will now move to our second session of citizen comments. And the next person to speak is Gary Gaddis. Please give your name, address, and then you have 5 minutes to speak.
Thank you. My name is Gary.
Hit the button at the bottom of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Gary Gaddis, and since 2016, I'm happily been a resident of University City with my wife and 702 Radcliffe. It's my privilege to live here, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to address you. I'd like to initiate a discussion tonight, hopefully, toward the council adopting a resolution in support of an organization called American Promise and its goals. Has anybody heard of American Promise? American Promise is a nationwide organization, nonprofit active in all 50 states, with the goal of adopting a proposed 20th Amendment to the Constitution to overturn the Roberts Court Citizens United decision that stated that corporations are people and limiting corporate contributions is a limitation on free speech. The reason I approach you is because over 800 municipalities have supported a resolution in support of the goals of American Promise. And I personally believe that when our grandchildren look at our history, they're going to look at the Roberts Court Citizens United decision as more or less equivalent to the Dred Scott decision of our generation. And if you don't remember what Dred Scott was about, Mr. Scott was born into slavery. It was held under the Taney Supreme Court. Ironically, Roger Taney has a county named after him in Missouri. It was held that Mr. Scott had no right to sue for his freedom because he wasn't a citizen. And that was awfully egregious. And I'm not going to say Citizens United is quite that egregious, but I think it comes fairly close. Because what Citizens United has done is destroyed and rendered ineffective meaningful attempts at campaign finance reform, and it's enabled dark money to flood both sides of the aisle into our political processes. Anybody who's ever contributed politically to a campaign knows that when one makes an above-board contribution, one must state one's occupation and employer, but that's not required for the dark money contributions. And removing campaign finance limits has had no salutary effects on our political process. It does enable the buying of influence in the halls of our Congress, and it drowns out the voices of the individual. Data from the 2014 elections show that in 91% of the cases, the candidate for office that was receiving the most financial support won. And I think that goes against the one person, one vote principle to some degree. And over 800 cities have adopted the idea espoused by American Promise, and there are cities all over the country. I have a handout to share with the council after I have a chance to say my piece that outlines a map of the United States and shows this. And I'm asking that University City would add its voice to the growing list of cities that endorse the principles of American Promise. And those cities include the city of St. Louis, Missouri, and the city of Kansas City, Missouri already. The only way to overturn Citizens United is to adopt a constitutional amendment. And big money in politics isn't about free speech, it's about buying influence. The Sunlight Foundation, which is the Citizens Watchdog Group, says that for every dollar that large corporations contributed to the political process, through various tax breaks and other considerations, they receive $758 back in benefits. Now, I'm not among the wealthiest 1% of Americans, but I'm among the wealthiest 2%. I don't have anything against wealthy people, or middle-class people, or poor people. But big money in politics drowns out individual voices, and it, I think, is a threat to our republic. And I side with the roughly 84% of Republicans and 92% Democrats who would support the principles of American Promise to have a constitutional amendment to limit political contributions in our public discourse. I want the America of my youth back, when we have a better representation of one citizen, one voice. I want the America of my youth back, where in my middle-class neighborhood growing up in Indiana, my U.S. congressman was the husband of my den mother, and he was very approachable to any citizen that wished to approach him. He happened to be a Republican named 5th District Representative in Indiana when I was a youth. And I'm going to now circulate a petition which states the exact wording of the proposed resolution. And I would hope that after some discussion and consideration, the council would consider supporting. And again, joining 800 cities across the country that supports the general theme of Campaign Farming to Farm. And I also have a little bit of time left, so I'm more than happy to entertain any questions anybody has. Thank you. I have accomplished my Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for your service.
Thank you as well. Appreciate it. Next request to speak from Ms. Jan Adams.
Jan Adams, 7150 Cambridge Avenue. I attended the October 16th Third Ward meeting that was published as an opportunity for citizens to tell this council what terms citizens want included in the developer's agreement for the Olive 170 development. I was both very surprised and very concerned when one of the lawyers that this council hired to negotiate the agreement stated that the city, and I quote, has no control over what the developer does. Let me repeat that for emphasis. One of our lawyers stated that the city has no control over what the developer does. Of course, this council has control over what the developer does and does not do. That is the whole purpose of negotiating a contract. To hold the developer accountable for the promises he has made to you and to me. Both of the Third Ward councilmen stated that the terms of the contract are determined by the city manager. And the city manager then states that they will be determined by the staff. Neither statement is true. This council has ultimate responsibility for whatever terms are or are not in that agreement. Make no mistake, we taxpayers will hold you seven accountable if you do not insist that the terms of the developer's agreement include adequate remedies and recoverable damages if the developer does not fulfill its promises to the citizens of your city. There are two lawyers on this council. I do not know if Mayor Crow has any experience enforcing contract law, but I do know that Mr. McMahon does. He knew to withhold a $100,000 insurance check from his contractor when he did not believe that his contractor performed in accordance with the contract that he personally negotiated. There's an extensive public legal file at the courthouse that demonstrates that Mr. McMahon is very well versed in contract law. There is absolutely no excuse for this council to pump the ball to either the city manager or the staff. A typical contract will contain per diem penalties for missing deadlines, clawbacks for using substandard materials or workmanship, or other material breaches. We taxpayers have paid, I suspect, thousands of dollars, but I'm waiting for a sunshine response to my sunshine request to know exactly how much, for special counsel to negotiate and draft the developer's agreement. We have also paid thousands for the PGAV study that simply accepted the developer's calculations and then issued a disclaimer for its accuracy. So maybe the lawyer is right, and this council has abdicated its authority to the developer. This council is projecting that it will simply sign off on any agreement presented to them and then pass any blame for any failure onto the developer. This is the very reason many citizens are fighting so hard for a CBA. We have good reason not to trust that this council will advocate for our individual rights. Contrary to what some on council have alleged, you do not have a, quote, mandate to turn over large portions of the Third Ward to some developer. Even though some of you have been planning this development for over 2 years, this issue was not debated during the last election. The first few times that I heard any of you state from the dais that you were elected to make major changes to our city, I let that hyperbole go. It is fair that you take a victory lap since you've been working for 8 years to undermine the Welsh-Walker administration. But for the record, there is no mandate here. Some of you are in office by default because you see politics has become a blood sport, and many qualified citizens will not engage in the process. Some of you are in office by appointment, and the one that appointment during the last election won by just 22 votes. That does not translate into any mandate to force people out of their homes and businesses in favor of a Costco or any other commercial enterprises. On a final note, and I know this is not a priority for you, but I'm not aware of any effort by this administration to create the portraits for Mayor Welch and Leland Walker. I recall that shortly after the 2010 election, some of you adamantly demanded the portrait of Julie Fire, even though she had served for a relatively short time and was extremely controversial and the subject of the citizen drive for the state audit. I believe it is incumbent on the city manager to see to it that the portraits of the former city manager and the mayor be commissioned and hung in chambers in the very near future. It has been 6 months.
Thank you.
And I request that my written comments be added to the minutes.
Our next request to speak is Patrick Fox.
My name is Patrick Fox, and I live at 1309 Purdue Avenue. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I concur with council members and Mayor Kerr regarding Washington University. I would like to add some additional information regarding some underlying details I have researched with the out-of-balance relationship that exists between University City and Washington University. I believe there is a misunderstanding largely predicated on the belief that property owned by Washington University is exempt from property taxes by virtue of the fact that they have been granted federal status as a nonprofit entity. I would assert that this assumption is incorrect. When reviewing the section of Missouri statutes that address tax exemptions, specifically 137.100 subsection 5, it does address schools and colleges being exempt from tax. However, it further states the following. The exemption herein granted does not include real property not actually used or occupied for the purpose of the organization, even though the income or rentals received therefrom is used wholly for religious, educational, or charitable purposes. I would submit that Washington University does charge its students for room and board at these properties, and as such, generates the income stated in the statute language regarding exception to the exemption. The city should consider taking measures to begin appropriately collecting property taxes under this exception provided in the statute. I would also like to add there's an antiquated notion that federally exempt entities are exempt from state and local taxes. That is not true. I work for several entities that are categorized as what the IRS determines to be tax exempt and government entities, some of which are public charities and some of which are political subdivisions or instrumentalities of the state of Missouri. First, income tax is due from nonprofits and government entities that conduct unrelated business activities. Additionally, there are several states that do not exempt entities from sales tax, specifically our neighbor to the west, Kansas, in which exemption is granted legislatively at the state level for each organization by name, not by type. Finally, I would like to add that the university has a healthy endowment. I am sure of which a significant portion is categorized as unrestricted and can be used to fulfill their obligation to the city if it decides to begin collecting taxes, as it should if it is permissible under the law because they unduly benefit from the status quo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes our citizen participation for this evening. Council comments. Mr. Smokes.
Just one quick, I just wanted to say, and I thought that something else was going to happen and the reason that, so I'm going to say this now. Just reminding the council about the literary reception that's going to be here October 27th at 7 p.m. And that's for Gerald Early. And then the other thing that I wanted to say is returning artist reception is November 14th. For Jeffrey Anderson, and I wanted to ask permission of Mayor Crow to read the proclamation because Mr. Anderson is not only a classmate of mine, but also a very, very good friend of mine. So, and that's it. Thank you.
Any other comments from my colleagues? Hearing none, before we move in, I just have a few brief ones. I wanted to very quickly look at the city clerk and I have gone through several of these neighboring municipalities, and as you know, the city manager has been diligently going through a review of our commissions, and we're going to continue that process. But I do hope that we all recognize that the number of commissions that we have in University City, a population of maybe 30,000, are the same number of commissions that the city of St. Louis has for 350,000 people. You can't find any city in St. Louis County that has more commissions than we do. And as we are struggling to find people to come on commissions, I do think that a proper review of our commissions and their structure is well needed. We have some of our cities, Richmond Heights next door has 4, Olivet has 9, Maryland Heights has 11, Chesterfield has 16, Clayton has 14, Wildwood has 15. I'm just trying to give you an idea of where we are, and that does not include all of the other boards we have, such as EDRST, etc. So just giving you a heads up on the size of that. I also wanted to very quickly say once again that I continue to look for a mechanical engineer, and it would be great if anyone knows the one, so we could have an appointment to one of the boards that does request a mechanical engineer. I also always appreciate getting a little bit of a tutorial on our responsibilities here as council members, and I can assure you that this council member asked for a clawback in a contract that it never came in. So I asked for those clawbacks. I also will tell you that I think per diem penalties are fine and clawbacks are fine, and I'm kind of trying to figure out why when the Gateway contract was done to outsource that we didn't have any of those things in that contract. But that's just me. And then I'd also like to congratulate the city manager and his staff. The municipal park grants commissions have come out, and University City received for Fogarty Park $525,000, the largest single grant given by the Park Commission. So congratulations. And finally, as I believe one of my colleagues said earlier, which is I think the last meeting we will have before the election or right around the election, maybe the night before, but everyone please go vote. The registration has closed though, so you can't do that. But everyone please go vote. And I would now entertain a motion to go into closed section according to Missouri Revised Statute 610.021, legal actions, causes of actions for litigation involving public governmental body, communications between the public governmental body or its representative and attorney. So moved by Mr. Hale, seconded by Mr. McMahon. Do I need a roll call on this one? I do. A roll call, please.
Councilmember Kusick.
Aye.
Councilmember Slauson. Councilmember Clay. Councilmember Carr.
Aye.
Councilmember McMahon.
Aye.
Councilmember Hales. Mayor Pro.
Aye. Thank you very much.